In classic westerns, the coding of the hats and the outfits would usually use whites and lighter colors to signify the good guys and the darker colors to signify the bad guys. A part of what George Lucas does in these Star Wars films is to continue the color coding but in a more elaborate scheme. So what I want to do first is take a look at these motifs, these costume motifs, and see what they suggest about the eras being portrayed in the 6 George Lucas Star Wars movies. I want to look at the costumes, but I also want to look at the vehicle design to make suggestions about what might be being discussed in these films. Let's start with the color white. The color white is worn by Luke, is worn by Leia, is worn by the stormtroopers. It's a curious choice to have the stormtroopers, Leia, and Luke all wearing the same color in the first episode of Star Wars. And so the question becomes, what does it represent? What does that color represent? And want to leave that to the side. Now let's look at the color brown, tan, or similar earth tones. These colors are worn by Yoda and other Jedi during the Old Republic. It's also worn by Yoda in Episode 5 and Episode 6. They're worn by Obi-Wan in the classic trilogy, and they're worn by Qui-Gon Jinn in The Phantom Menace. They're worn by Jar Jar Binks, everyone's favorite character, and they're also worn by Chewbacca. And yes, that's his fur, but that is also his choice to wear his fur on the outside instead of wearing clothes. And so there's something being represented that this color or these kinds of colors tie the group of people together who are wearing those colors. Now we have this sort of mixed colors, the mixed costuming, which brings in more complication once we start getting into what these codes actually mean. But you have Anakin Skywalker, who in Episode 2 and Episode 3 of Star Wars wears increasingly dark colors. And these dark colors are still mixed with earth tones and still have a certain earth tone quality to them, but they are much darker than when we see him in Episode 1 of Star Wars when he's wearing tan like other Jedi. Then you have Han Solo, who wears a white shirt, black pants or black vest, and wears browns as well. And so he's this mix of black and white, whatever those things are being coded to mean. Now we have the derivatives of black. We have a charcoal color that Moff Tarkin wears. We have a dark black that the Emperor wears, Emperor Palpatine, which when we get into the next set of colors, we'll see that he doesn't always wear that. But the more he becomes who he really is, the more he wears dark colors. And Darth Vader, of course, who wears all black and metallic colors. And the final costume colors that we'll look at are the colors that Palpatine and Padme wear as politicians. They wear multicolors, and in their various roles, they will change colors, change makeup, change their attire in order to match the situation. So, George Lucas gives us Luke, Leia, the stormtroopers all in white on the one end. And on the other end, we have Vader, and the Emperor, all in black. So these are the traditional good guys, bad guys. But why are the stormtroopers in the white category? And then what is the earth tones? What do these represent? In each of those cases, Jar Jar Binks, Chewbacca, Obi-Wan, Yoda, etc., they're all connected to the Force or to the earth. Because the Force in Star Wars is nature. It equals nature. It's the same thing as nature. It's the power that creates nature and that binds nature together. And so this represents people who are connected to the Force. Black represents people who are connected to moral depravity or a lack of moral guidance or lack of innocence, a lack of moral light. And so you also have the case of these politicians who wear multiple colors because of the way that politicians have to shift their colors, have to shift their shape in order to match the different audiences that they're with. Now, in Amidala's case, she has more consistent bright colors, more consistent light colors. And in Palpatine's case, he has darker colors. And so it sort of shows what way their shades tilt. The stormtroopers are in white because of what this is talking about. This whole set of films is talking about politically. And what I would suggest it's talking about politically is that Palpatine is a figure who represents totalitarianism, who represents, more specifically, American totalitarianism or American imperialism, and the way that American imperialism has spread over the earth in order to tell the earth how to live. And remember, when these are thought up, it's during the Vietnam War, which is famously a war that is not seen very favorably by history. Now, there are more examples of why I think this, but I'm just putting that out there with the costumes as something to chew on. And so you can't blame the people who are the soldiers, the foot soldiers, the stormtroopers, for the moral depravity of the leadership in a hierarchy like that, because they believe that they're fighting for the heroic right. They believe they're they're fighting for what is correct. And so that's why they have a moral innocence that Palpatine and Darth Vader don't have. Well, one of the criticisms that is often or has often been levied against the prequels is that the ships look nicer, the ships look newer, and they look more beautiful than the ships in the original Star Wars series. And I want to explore why they look that way. And when we look at why they look that way, it will give us a sense of also why or what eras George Lucas is discussing with these films, with these Star Wars films. If you look here, you can see some of the Naboo cruisers, some of the droid army fighters at odds with each other. And notice the round lines, the organic lines, the sanguine lines. They're softer, they're nicer, they're more elegant. That's the word. They are more elegant. And keep in mind what Obi-Wan said about this era when he was using a lightsaber more than a blaster. It was a more civilized, an elegant weapon for a more civilized age. Okay, now look at these lines. The lines of these ship designs. These lines are more angular. These lines have triangles and squares and rectangles, and even when there are globes like the Death Star or the burners, the burners on the back of the ships, they are industrial looking because they have, look at the Death Star in particular, they have squares, blocks imprinted on them. It's all designed around blocks and triangles and industrial looking shapes that can be reproduced cheaply and efficiently without thinking much about beauty. It's a utility over beauty design, and that's an important piece of the puzzle. All right, now notice these pre-war designs. You have the sanguine lines, those are the curvy lines. You have the organic shapes. It looks elegant, the design. The design is to be beautiful and utilitarian. Now, notice in these post-war designs how organic, elegant shapes gradually give way to harder angles, harder lines, more industrial looking vehicles that look like they're the old cars filtered through tanks and other war machines. And you can get the idea of what George Lucas is reaching for here with these designs. He's talking about an era of change, and not for the better. An era that changed from more freedom, more love of art, love of life, love of beauty, to an era that's increasingly about more power, technological power, more ability to control, more of that illusion that nature no longer needs to be heeded or listened to.